Thanks, Sean. Again, I'd like to thank all of you guys for all the support and love for Hiram and his homegoing. We had a celebration yesterday, and it was a celebration. It was totally an awesome time to remember him, and it was a lot of fun. And a lot of people came from different walks of his life. He had people from our community who came, and some of the people we didn't even know who they were, and they were our neighbors. So that's kind of sad, but they live far away from us, okay? But it was all good though. So we had a great time, and all our family was here, and it was really a lot of fun. So thank you again for that, and appreciate that. Hey, we have a special guest here today. His name is Samuel Bruce Walker, and hold old Samuel up back there. There he is. There he is. Yeah. Samuel, I'm going to give you your first sermon, son, and if I see your hand go up, I'll go, amen, brother, and that's all good. Yeah. Yeah, he's already asleep. I haven't even started, so it's not even fair. You know what I mean? I don't even have a chance, so that's all good. So we live in a world where there is a world of chances. And, for example, you have a chance of winning the lottery. It's 1 in 292.2 million. You have a chance of getting hit by lightning. It's 1 in 1,222,000. You have a chance of dying by a bee sting. And that, I'm so encouraging today. And that's 1 in 54,516. Now, this one's really disturbing to me. You have a chance of getting bit by a spider. It's 1 in 12,000. I don't like those odds, you know. I am so arachnophobic. This guy here is actually a picture of me in the back, and not really, but I was at my high school. I was at my grandson's high school graduation reunion. I was going to say his graduation this last year in Phoenix, and we're sitting in the football stands with all these people, and this lady behind me hits me on the shoulder, like, and I turned around and she goes, "I'm so sorry, but there was a spider crawling on you." I said, "You could slap me upside the face if there was a spider on me. I give you total permission, because I would be screaming and running like crazy." I am arachnophobic. My favorite and worst movie is Arachnophobia. If you're arachnophobic and you watch that, you wonder, why am I doing this? Just torturing yourself. But I was going to entitle the messages I'm giving over the next 3 weeks, "Give Jesus a Chance." That's how I was going to do it. But the more I thought about that, the more I didn't like it. Because I don't believe that Jesus is like a money-back guarantee. I don't like the idea, if I tried Jesus, it didn't work for me, so can I have my tithe back? Just didn't like that idea. So I decided to call them, "You Have a Chance with Jesus." To quote a great theologian, Lloyd Christmas. So you're telling me there's what? There's a chance. Yes, that's exactly what I'm going to do. Over the next couple of weeks, I'm going to tell you, you always have a chance with Jesus, no matter who you are or what you've ever done. As we start our series, You Have a Chance with Jesus, we're going to look at a man in the Bible who we would put in the category of no chance. And by that, I don't mean like he doesn't have a chance at all. He would be on the least likely list of people who would ever end up following Jesus. And a lot of you know people like that. For example, in the New Testament time, on the least likely list, it would have been this guy named Saul of Tarsus. If you would have talked to the church in Jerusalem when the church first got started, and you say, who's on the most least likely person ever to come to faith in Jesus, they would say that guy Saul, who persecutes the church, who drags people off to have them tortured and put to death. He'd be the least likely candidate to come to faith. Matter of fact, when he came to faith, no one believed it. And when he tried to go to Jerusalem as a believer now, no one wanted to meet with him because everybody was afraid of him. So Barnabas took him around and introduced him to everybody because they didn't believe that he was really legit, because that's how much they feared him. In our times, it could be someone like, and a lot of you have read a lot of his books, Lee Strobel, who was an atheist. He went to Yale. He's a really smart guy. He was an editor in the Chicago Sun-Times. He was a guy whose wife becomes a believer. And his goal in life is, my wife has joined a cult, and she's going to lead my daughter into this cult, and I've got to stop it. So to stop it, I've got to disprove Christianity. And so he set out on a mission to do it. Spent a couple years researching Christianity with the sole purpose to prove to his wife that it wasn't true. And he came to the conclusion that the only way to really disprove Christianity is to disprove the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So that's what he did. He went on this 2-year mission to figure out and prove to her that this was just a hoax. People made it up. This is a cult. And one of his friends who he worked with said to him, Lee, what are you going to do if at the end of all this you find out it's true? You try to disprove it, but you can't, and you find out it's true. What are you going to do? Are you going to be intellectually honest enough to say, if this is true, then I need to give my life to it? And that's what he did. He went from a devout atheist to one of the greatest Christian apologists that we know today. He went from being the editor in the Chicago Sun-Times to now he works at a college teaching theology and is a pastor of a church in Houston, Texas. Another guy is J. Warner Wallace, who would be on that list. He was the lead detective for all the cold case murders that take place in Los Angeles. And he was a devout atheist. And he said, if you can't prove it with science, it can't be true. And so he lived his life that way. But in the course of his police work, he makes this statement. He said, there were things that I could not explain with science. There were things that I saw and things that I experienced that had to come somewhere supernaturally. And he said, with that, he decided, I'm going to take all my expertise as a cold case detective and I'm going to turn it on the New Testament. And I'm going to research every part of it to decide whether or not this is true, especially on the Gospels and the story of Jesus. He wrote a book called Cold Case Christianity. And if you have never read it, it's a great book because he basically goes through all of the witnesses of the disciples and the Gospels and all of these things. And through his research, he becomes a believer. And now he's a strong believer who advocates. You want to discuss if there's any other evidence outside of the Bible for the truth of the resurrection and the life of Jesus Christ, talk to me. I'll show you all these things. And so there's these people who I would say are on the least likely list. And maybe some of you here today, that was you. I found this poem. It's one of my favorite. If you know my sense of humor, you'll know why. It says this: I was shocked, confused, bewildered as I entered heaven's door, not by the beauty of it all, nor the lights or its decor. It was the folks in heaven who made me sputter and gasp, the thieves, the liars, the sinners, and the alcoholics and trash. There stood the kid from 7th grade who swiped my lunch money twice. Next to him was my old neighbor who never said anything nice. Bob, who I always thought was rotting away in hell, was sitting pretty on cloud 9, looking incredibly well. I nudged Jesus. What's the deal? I would love to hear your take. How'd all these sinners get up here? God must have made a mistake. And why is everyone so quiet, so somber? Give me a clue. Hush, child, he said. They're all in shock. Not one thought they'd be seeing you. So like most of us, it's fortunate that we get in, right? So today, as in most sermon series, the overall series title is You Have a Chance with Jesus, but the subtitle today is No Chance Zacchaeus. So if you have your Bibles, I want you to turn today to Luke chapter 19, and we're going to be looking at the story of Zacchaeus, one of the more popular stories, and most of you, if you've gone to church at any length of time, have heard this story many, many times. It's interesting, the background to Luke 19. So in Luke 19, we find that Jesus is headed to Jerusalem for the final week of his life, and on the way there, he stops in the city of Jericho. And Jericho in Jesus' day was called the Eden of Palestine. It was a beautiful place with great temperatures. But it was a place where people rested. before they headed on this journey, and I didn't realize this till I was reading through this, a 6-hour trip, a 6-hour walk from Jericho to Jerusalem, and you go from 600 feet below sea level in Jericho to 3,000 feet above sea level in Jerusalem. So it's an uphill climb all the way from Jericho to Jerusalem. And so most of us know the story of Zacchaeus from our Sunday school days. How many of you remember the song, Zacchaeus was a wee little man? Let me see your hand. Okay, great. If you know that, you all, hey, keep your hand up. You get to sing with me. We're going to sing it together. Here we go. Got the words on the screen? Here we go. Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and a wee little man was he. He climbed up in a sycamore tree, for the Lord he wanted to see. And as the Savior passed that way, he looked up in the tree, and he said, Zacchaeus, please come down, for I'm going to your house today. For I'm going to your house today. There you go. Hey, well, that was my sermon. Let's close in prayer. And I heard some amens out there. I'll take that personally. So anyway. Hey, we'll start off. Notice verse 1 of chapter 19. I want you to notice here the searching sinner, this man named Zacchaeus. Verse 1 says, he entered Jericho and was passing through, and behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus. It's interesting. Zacchaeus' name literally means this, innocent one. And if you know anything about him, he was anything but that. He wasn't innocent at all. It says there, he was a chief tax collector and was rich. Now, being the chief tax collector meant this. He was the commissioner of taxes for that region for the Roman government. He was rich because if the Romans charged 5% for taxes, he would charge 10% and take 5% right off the top. And it was also interesting that the Jews hated him. They viewed the tax collectors as extortionists, which they were, and Roman supporters, and they were despised. They were so hated by the Jews, they were not allowed to go to the temple. So even though Zacchaeus could have been a follower of God and wanted to go to the temple, they wouldn't allow him in because of who he was. He was a tax collector. It's also interesting that he had other people who worked for him, other tax collectors, and maybe they gave him a percentage of what he made. And so he was as crooked as a $3 bill. Good old Zacchaeus. And then notice verse 3, it says this. And he was seeking to see who Jesus was. The word seeking literally means he deliberately was searching to see Jesus. We could call him basically the original seeker. And, maybe he'd heard about Jesus had raised, right before that, he had raised Lazarus from the dead. I'm sure that story got around, don't you think so? The other thing is interesting is that in Luke's gospel, 7 times he mentions tax collectors, and in all of the times that he mentions them, it's always in a positive light. He always mentions them in a comparison like to a Pharisee and how God has blessed them and forgiven them. And he always mentions the tax collectors in a positive way. And so maybe he thought, hey, this guy actually likes tax collectors. I want to see who he is. And the other thing is maybe he knew that Matthew was on his team. And Matthew was what? A tax collector. I often wondered if they knew each other. Maybe they ended up at the same tax collectors convention or something. And they knew each other. And I thought it would be really hilarious, we don't know this, if Matthew actually worked for Zacchaeus. But anyway, that's who Zacchaeus was. He had one problem there. I called it one small problem, which is a poor joke. Okay. But on account of the crowd, it says, he could not see because he was small in stature. I looked up what it meant to be small in stature. First of all, that word small in the Greek is the word micro. So he was a micro man. Okay, you go. You can go on with that. But it says here that in the Mediterranean standard, that if you were less than 5 feet tall, that's what they meant by small. So he was less than 5 feet tall. He was vertically challenged, we might say. Now, I know somebody who's 5 feet tall. I know this person really, really well. So Kathy's 5 feet tall. And being 5 feet tall has its challenges. And one of them early on was theaters. Theaters used to just be Kathy's worst nightmare. We would go to the theater. Remember that when all of them were just a little bit of a slope? And we would sit down. And then guess who would sit in front of us? The Foley family. The Foley family would sit down. 6'6", 6'5", 6'4". And Jen, how tall are you? Okay, there you go. That's taller than us. Okay. The whole family would be in front of us, and we'd be looking like this, going, oh my gosh, why did they sit in front of us? And then they came up with stadium seating, right? Which was like an act of God. Just one of the greatest blessings ever. So, but in our family, it's pretty exciting. Our grandson, Asher, who's 9 years old, just went to the doctor for one of his checkups, and the doctor, you know how they try to tell you approximately how tall he's going to be? And they say Asher's going to be 6 feet. And we all go, 6 feet? He's going to break the generational curse of the Jones family of being that tall. One time when Asher was like in 5 or 6 years old, Kathy and I took him to a little program he had at his school. And, we go there, and he goes to his class, and we were waiting for the program to start. And I think Kip and Kristen were gone. I don't remember. They weren't there. And so we were there, and out comes his class to do this little program in their little gymnasium at the elementary school. And all of a sudden, we couldn't find Asher. And the grandparents' worst nightmare is losing one of their grandkids, right? And have to explain, I don't know what happened to him. We couldn't find him, and we're just going, oh, my gosh, where is he? And then I saw, Kathy. He's in the back row. Now, you don't know, for us, nobody in our family ever gets up in the back row. We're always in the front row because we're short. But Asher was in the back. We were so excited. We were more excited about Asher being in the back row than about his little concert. But that was Zacchaeus. He was short. And he must have been in really good shape because look at verse 4, what it says. It says, so he ran ahead. And he climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was about to pass that way. I have a picture here of a sycamore tree, and I want you to notice, it's not like you think it is. This is what it was like. It was a very tall tree, had a huge trunk. It was short. Branches came out. It was really easy to climb. So you can imagine, here's a road, there's a sycamore tree, and you can imagine how easy it would be for Zacchaeus to crawl up onto one of those limbs and be waiting there for Jesus to walk by. And that's exactly what he did. So I want you to notice what happens here in verses 5 through 7. We see the seeking Savior, okay? Verse 5 says, and when Jesus came to this place, he looked up. Now, I want you to think about this. To Jesus, this was a divine appointment. He's walking along, going with his disciples. He comes along this sycamore tree, and all of a sudden he stops and he looks up. And it says there, and he said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down. Now, there's an obvious question here, and what's that? How did he know his name? How did he know Zacchaeus' name? I don't think Zacchaeus had a name tag that said Zacchaeus, chief tax collector, and he saw his name tag. Remember at Compass, we used to wear name tags. Remember that? We'd all write our name, put on a name tag. Every Sunday, you'd have a name tag. And I remember one Sunday I went to Costco, and I forgot to take my name tag off. And I was standing by the chickens, where they sell the chickens, you know that? Where you can buy, and this lady goes, are these fresh? And she thought I worked there because I had a name tag on. And I said, ma'am, I don't work here, and I really don't know. Oh, and I ripped my name tag off. But I don't think he had a name tag on. But you know what that showed him? I wonder if he thought this. Only a prophet would know my name. Only the Messiah might know who I really am. And then he says this to him, for I must stay at your house today. I love that. It's the only place in the gospel where Jesus invites himself over for dinner. I always thought, I should do that. I'm a pastor. Hey, by the way, I'm going to your house today. What are you having for lunch? Kath and I are coming over. We actually had a lead pastor in our very first church who was the greatest practical jokers of all time. And one time at our house about 5:30, we get a phone call, and Kathy picks up the phone, and it was Pastor Tate. And she goes, Kathy, it's Pastor Tate. Joy and I were running late, but we'll be there for dinner. Just don't get too excited. And Kathy puts the phone like, they're coming for dinner? You never told me they're coming for dinner. And she gets back on the phone. He goes, I'm just kidding, Kath. It's the kind of guy that he was, okay? And but imagine that. Jesus basically says, hey, I'm coming to your house for dinner. I've often thought about this. I've often thought about Jesus was always eating dinner somewhere. Have you noticed that? He did. He always was going to somebody's house. He was either invited over or whatever. He always was going to eat with other people. There's a great principle here, and I want you to think about this one. And the principle is this. If you want to reach them, you need to spend time where they do. You need to go where people are at. A lot of you play pickleball, people go out to dinner, people, in your neighborhood, you have a pool, maybe you go fishing, you're at the gym, you exercise, you work, kids' games, you sit with the same people over and over and over again. One of the reasons why I think we don't reach people is we just don't hang out with people who don't go to church or aren't like us. And we have all the opportunities in the world. And we need to reach people where they're at. And look what he says in verse 6. It says there, so he hurried down. He hurried and came down and received him joyfully. Think about that. What Zacchaeus could have said. Jesus said, I'm going to your house. And Zacchaeus could have said, oh crap, he saw me. That would be somebody's response. Or how about this one? Hey, Jesus, let me check my phone. I'm so sorry, Jesus. My son has a Little League game today. I'm sorry you can't come over because I'm too busy for you. All these reasons. To me, it's interesting. This is verse 7. And when the Pharisees saw it, it says this, they all grumbled. He has gone to be the guest of a man who was a sinner. That's right. You know why the legalist Pharisees could never have done that? There are several reasons. One is maybe they didn't trust the food. They didn't trust like this food was going to be kosher or clean or healthy. I read one guy, and I never thought of this, but he said this. Maybe they didn't come because they weren't sure that the food that they were going to eat had been tithed on. What do you mean by that? Well, in Matthew 23, Jesus gives what's called the 7 woes in Matthew 23. What a great sermon title, right? And what did your pastor speak on today? The 7 woes. How much fun that would have been. But one of the woes was this. He says this. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you tithe mint and dill and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. In other words, the Pharisees were so legalistic, they would even tithe the stuff that they put in their food. They would tithe the mint. They would tithe dill. They would tithe cumin. They would give a little bit of it and take it to the temple and offer it as a tithe unto God. And they wouldn't eat food unless this food had not been tithed on. Now, how many of you have ever asked anybody when you go to their house to eat, did you tithe on this food? If you didn't tithe on it, then I can't eat it. But here's the point. If you're not willing to hang out with sinners, you're not going to hang out with anybody. If you're not willing to go to church with sinners, you're not going to go to a church. And as soon as churches think they're not sinners, that's when the what? That's when hypocrisy just sets in all over the place. Because Sarah mentioned it today. We are what? Sinners saved by grace. None of us are perfect. We're sinful people. And we do sinful things, even after we come to faith. And if you don't think that's true, and if you think you're above that, then that's sin. And you've already messed up. It's like as soon as you think you've reached perfection, you've just what? Become arrogant. And you've lost your perfection. And so that applies to the church as well. Very important. I love that part of it. One other point, and I kind of skipped over this because I get ahead of myself. But one other point here is this. Before you invite someone to church, invite them to dinner. You ever thought about that? I'm like you. You want to invite people you know to church, and that's great. But before you invite them to church, maybe get to know them a little better. Maybe make it not so uncomfortable. Invite them to dinner. Invite them to your house. Invite them out where you get to know them. And as you build a relationship with them, then they're more likely to come with you. But if you just walked up to somebody cold turkey and invite them to church, the chances of that today are slim and none they're going to come. It used to be that people would come all the time. But they come when they know you. They come because you invited them, and they feel comfortable being what? With you. But Jesus started by going to where they were at, by not expecting them to come where he was at. Thirdly, I want you to notice this. The supernatural salvation, okay? Verse 8 says this, and Zacchaeus stood, and he said to the Lord, behold, Lord, half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. Now, the Old Testament law stated this. If you rip somebody off, you would have to pay them 120% of what you ripped them off. In other words, you would pay back the 100% of what you owed them plus 20%. Zacchaeus just randomly says, hey, I have ripped people off. I'm going to give them 400% of what I took. I'm going to quadruple it. His restitution is in response to his grace, not in order to receive it. He didn't do this because Jesus said, well, if you really want to follow me, you got to do all of these things. He did it because what? His life was changed. And he knew the right thing to do. I'll never forget when I was in college, I was married the last 2 years. And I didn't forget my senior year in college, I didn't have like a dorm room or anything. So when I'd have an hour or two between class, I would be there on campus. I would go to our coach, basketball and baseball coach was the same guy. We'd go to his office and just sit down and talk to him. And I was in Coach Hill's office at Western Baptist College when a box shows up. And I remember if it was UPS or the mail or whatever. So this brown box shows up. And Hills goes, what's that? And I go, I don't know. And he goes, it's from Marty Heron. And he goes, Marty. Now, Marty was a guy that played basketball with me for 2 years at Western Baptist College. And Marty, he's the guy there on the left. And Marty was from West Covina, California. He grew up, his hair before he came to Western Baptist was down to his shoulders. He played beach volleyball, and he was tan. He had a permanent scar on him from being tan. And he was a free-spirited Southern California boy who came to faith and ended up going to Western Baptist Bible College. Got all his hair cut off. And he never played much basketball except, in church leagues and all that kind of stuff. But he was the greatest athlete I've ever been around. And he was 5'11" and led our team in rebounding both years that I played. And he was phenomenal. He was not afraid of anything. And he was this carefree guy. So halfway through his sophomore year, basketball was over. He drops out of school. And he goes with a friend of his that was going with this evangelistic group that traveled the United States doing revival, services and that kind of stuff. And Marty goes just to be on the stage crew and help drive the bus. And I hadn't heard from him since then. This last year, I get an email from Marty Heron. And he found out where I was at. He emailed me, and we started emailing back and forth. And I always thought, what happened to Marty? And I found out that Marty Heron is now the executive vice president of Faith Baptist Bible College and Theological Seminary. Dr. Marty Heron. And what amazed me about in that box was this. We opened up this box, and inside of it was this old Western Baptist duffel bag, a baseball, and a pair of warm-up pants that Western Baptists hadn't worn in 20 years that all of us had a pair of. And Marty says something like this. Here's what he wrote. He wrote this note, and it says this. It says, Coach, I took this stuff when I left. I want to make it right, Marty. He sent it all back. I felt so guilty because I had the same stuff. And I didn't want to give it back. So I said, hey, Coach, I got this same stuff. Can I have it? Yeah, go ahead, Jones. It's your senior year. You can take it. I got the guilt off. But what happened was Marty decided I'm going to follow Jesus and give him total control of my life. And when he did that, he said, I got this stuff that I took. I got to make it right. And so we sent it back. Just random stuff. The coach could care less about it. But to Marty, what? It was a step in the right direction. And I always thought, what happened to Marty? He found out, he went on, got his doctorate, served the Lord, and then he said to me, Kelley, still great to know that you're serving the Lord. Marty, when we talked. It was an awesome time to talk with him again. And there's an important principle here, and you see it in Marty's life, you see it in Zacchaeus' life, and the principle is this: no change, no Jesus. People want forgiveness today, but they don't want to follow. Jesus, I want you to forgive me of my sin, because if you're real, I don't want to go to hell, so I want you to forgive me, but I don't want to follow you. I don't want to live the way you want me to live. I want to live my own way in life, not the way you want me to live, but I do want to be forgiven. In other words, I want you to have control of my life, but only when it comes to my sin, not when it comes to my life. I want to do what I want to do. And Zacchaeus was radically changed. He was a changed man. You say, how do you know he was changed? Because he gave back all this money. He gave half of what he owned to the poor, and he paid back everybody else 400%. And Jesus never told him to do that. He just did it because what? It was the right thing to do. And it showed that his life has totally been changed. Look what Jesus said to him in verse 9. Today, he says, salvation has come to this house. Salvation there meant forgiveness. Forgiveness has come to this house. And then he says this, since he also is a son of Abraham. No Jew would ever have called Zacchaeus a son of Abraham because of his involvement with the Romans. They hated him, but Jesus did. Jesus said, he is a Jew, just like the rest of us. And I want you to never forget this. I've talked on this before, but I don't want you to ever forget what the greatest miracle is. The greatest miracle. If I ask you, what's your favorite miracle, what would it be? Anybody? Besides turning water into wine. That was the first miracle. Okay. The resurrection, yeah. Okay. And that's great. I mean, you can't count that one either. Sorry. No. That is unbelievable.
Transformation in my life.
Yeah. The greatest miracle is a converted life, a changed life. There's nothing greater than that. So often, you see all these people and they have miracle crusades, and all this, and there's all this fanfare, and people are getting healed, and all these things are going on. People are bouncing off the wall, and all of this, and these are all the miracles, and show me a sign, and all this kind of stuff. I just say, that doesn't mean anything to me. The greatest miracle is when somebody's life is radically changed. The greatest miracle is when Saul of Tarsus became the Apostle Paul and wrote 2/3 of the New Testament. The greatest miracle is people like Lee Strobel, and who now is, at Houston Baptist University. The greatest miracle is all of us whose life has changed. Hey, my life has changed, but my life is not perfect. Right? But a lot of us are different people. Different than we were. Why? Because in our life, our goal is to follow Jesus. We're not perfect people. Heaven knows that's true, and so do all our friends and everybody who knows us. But the changed life, that's the greatest miracle of all. And I've seen that. I've seen people's life radically changed. And guess what? That's what we always say. You want to be a witness? Tell people your story. Can't argue with somebody's story. Can't argue with somebody who says, hey, this is me. My life was radically changed when I came to faith in Jesus Christ. Can't argue with that. And then Jesus closes this. It's really great. I love what he says in verse 10. John writes this, or Luke writes this about Zacchaeus, and then Jesus makes this statement. This is his mission statement. He says, for the Son of Man came to what? Seek and to save the lost. That's what he says. When Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, what did they do? They went and hid. Remember that? What did God do? He went looking for them. Where are you? I always thought that was really funny, right? Playing hide and go seek with God. We used to play hide and go seek with Kip, right? And he would be hiding under the bed, and we'd go, where are you, Kip? And he'd be giggling. We all knew where he was at. That's like hide and go seek with God. Like, you think you can hide from God? Good luck with that. Ask Jonah how that went. I love what it says in Ezekiel 34:16. When the nation of Israel went off the rails, God says this, I will seek the lost, and I will bring back the strayed. I want you to think about this. Like Zacchaeus, Jesus seeks us more intensely than we seek him. He used to be called, people in the old days called him the hound of heaven. When Jesus goes after you, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what anybody says. He goes after you. And when God goes after you to bring you back, he will go after you. He is unlimited in his resources and creativity and his ability to change your life. So you might be here today, and you might think you're on that no chance list. I've had people say, man, if I came to church, the walls would fall in. Have you heard that? The place would burn down if I came to church. And what they're saying is, you don't know me, Jones. You don't know how bad a life I've lived, and God could never forgive me. And all I got to say to that is what? You don't know God. You don't know him. He's had worse people than you on his hands before. And he's totally forgiven them. If Zacchaeus could find forgiveness from Jesus, so could you. His grace is greater than all our sin. But you got to think about this one. Until a person is lost, he cannot be found. So often today, people don't think they're lost. They don't. They don't think they're lost. We've redefined what sin is. And so therefore, we try to take sin out of the equation. Instead of people realizing, I need to be forgiven of my life because I am living in disobedience to God. And when you realize you're lost, that's when you can what? Be found. And Jesus is there. And the other thing is this. You might know people who you would say they're on your no chance list. There's people you know that you would say, man, he's on the least likely list. She's on the least likely list of somebody who would ever come to faith. And I want you to know that list does not exist. Anybody can come to faith. And people have come to faith who have lived crazy, crazy, crazy lives in total disobedience to God. And God what? Has got involved in their life, showed them their need of Christ. They've asked Christ to come in and forgive them, and he totally had forgiven everything that they've ever done. That's who he is. You know people like that? Keep praying for them. Some of you are here today who people prayed for you for 20, 30, 40 years, and you finally came to faith. I know some people like that. Came to faith in their 70s. Who their whole life had kind of lived in disobedience. And then one day, the blindness got removed from their heart. They saw, hey, I'm a sinner who needs to be forgiven before a holy God. And they asked Christ to come in and forgive them of their sin. And he did exactly that. And he will do it for you. Just like he did it for me and for a lot of people that are here today. He loves you and he seeks after you. The Son of Man came to seek and to save those who were lost. That was his mission. That's our mission as believers, to reach people who don't know him. And to do that, we have to be like Jesus in the sense of make friends with people like Zacchaeus. The people that other people would say, man, I can't be that guy's friend. They're a sinner. Hey, he sent us after sinners. And we can relate to them because we're what? A sinner. We have one thing in common, right? And it's that. Let's pray.